The crystal glass was nearly touching his lips when she grabbed his wrist. Marco Santini froze. In his 32 years, 20 of them spent running the most feared crime family in New York. Nobody had ever dared to touch him without an invitation, especially not a waitress in a rundown diner on the wrong side of Brooklyn. His bodyguards reacted instantly, hands moving towards concealed weapons, but he raised his free hand just slightly, stopping them in their tracks. "Don't swallow it. It's poisoned," she whispered. Her green eyes locked onto his with a fierce intensity that sent an electric jolt through his entire system. Time seemed to slow down, almost stop. The loud, chaotic sounds of the diner faded into a dull, meaningless hum. Marco studied her face intently, searching for any sign of dishonesty, fear, anything at all that might explain why this woman, this complete stranger in a coffee-stained apron and yesterday's mascara, had just saved his life. "Explain," he said, his voice dangerously low and controlled. Her hand trembled against his wrist, but she didn't release her grip. "Your business partner, Vincent. I saw him slip something into your drink when you went to the bathroom. I know who you are, Mr. Santini. I know what happens to people who cross you, but I just couldn't stand by and watch someone die right in front of me." Marco's jaw tightened. Vincent Morello, his right-hand man for 8 years. The guy he'd trusted with his life, his entire empire, all his secrets. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife ever could. He set the glass down, letting it sit untouched on the scratched-up Formica tabletop. His dark, intense eyes never left her face. She was beautiful in that tired, overworked, trying to make ends meet kind of way. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, freckles dusted across her nose, and lips that probably smiled a lot more than they frowned, despite all the hardships life had clearly thrown her way. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emma. Emma Sullivan." She finally let go of his wrist, taking a step back as reality seemed to come crashing down on her. Her face went pale. "Oh God, I just grabbed a mafia boss. I'm gonna die, aren't I?" Then, something completely unexpected happened. Marco Santini, the man his enemies called the Reaper, smiled. Not the cold, predatory smile he usually wore in business dealings, but a real one, a genuine one. "No, Emma Sullivan, you're not going to die." He stood up, his 6'3" frame towering over her 5'5" "You're going to live, and you're going to tell me everything you saw." His men surrounded Vincent's booth before the traitor even knew what was happening. Marco watched as his former friend's face went white as a sheet. He watched him try to make a run for it and fail miserably. He watched him realize that his carefully planned assassination had fallen apart because of a waitress with a conscience. "Take him to the warehouse," Marco ordered, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. "I'll deal with him personally." As his men dragged Vincent out through the kitchen entrance, Marco turned back to Emma. She was standing frozen behind the counter, clutching a coffee pot like it might protect her from whatever was coming next. "You work tonight?" he asked. Yes, until 11. "Not anymore. You're coming with me." "What? I can't just leave. I need this job. I have rent due and student loans." "And how much do you make here?" Emma blinked. That's none of your business." Marco pulled out his wallet, took out a thick stack of $100 bills, and placed them on the counter. "That's $20,000. Consider it a thank you for saving my life. Now, you're coming with me because Vincent had partners. If they find out you're the reason their plan failed, you'll be dead by morning." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Emma looked at the money, then at him, then at the door where Vincent had disappeared. Her hands shook as she untied her apron. "I don't understand why you'd protect me." "Because you protected me first." Marco gestured towards the door. "And because I don't let good people die for doing the right thing." Emma grabbed the money with trembling fingers and shoved it into her purse. She followed him out into the cold October night, her thin jacket offering little protection against the wind that whipped through the Brooklyn streets. A black Mercedes was waiting at the curb, engine running, windows tinted so dark that she couldn't see inside. Marco opened the back door for her. The gesture seemed strangely gentlemanly for a man whose reputation was built on violence and fear. Emma hesitated on the sidewalk, caught between the familiar misery of her life and the terrifying unknown of his world. "I promise you," he said, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. "No harm will come to you under my protection." Something in his eyes made her believe him. Maybe it was stupid. Maybe it was suicidal. But Emma Sullivan had been playing it safe her entire life. And where had it gotten her? Working double shifts for tips that barely covered groceries. Living in a tiny studio apartment with a broken heater. Drowning in debt from a nursing degree she'd never finished. She got in the car. The interior smelled like expensive leather and cologne. Marco slid in beside her, and the door closed with a heavy, final-sounding thud. As the car pulled away from the curb, Emma watched the diner disappear in the side mirror, her old life fading into the distance. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe. My estate in the Hamptons." He pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "I need to make some calls, find out who else was involved in this betrayal." Emma studied his profile in the dim light from passing street lamps. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, eyes that had seen way too much darkness. But there was something else there, too. Something she hadn't expected to find in a man like him. Loneliness. Bone-deep, soul-crushing loneliness. "Thank you," he said suddenly, turning to meet her gaze, "for what you did back there. Most people would have just looked the other way." "I'm a nurse. Or I was trying to be." Emma shrugged. "I couldn't just let someone die. Even if that someone scares half the city." "I don't scare you?" She considered lying, then decided against it. "You terrify me, but you also just saved my life, so I figure we're even." Marco laughed, and the sound transformed his entire face. For a moment he didn't look like the Reaper. He looked like a man who rarely had any reason to laugh. The drive to the Hamptons took 2 hours. Emma dozed off somewhere around the first hour, her head eventually coming to rest against Marco's shoulder. He didn't move her. Instead, he sat perfectly still, making his phone calls and speaking quietly in Italian, coordinating the dismantling of a conspiracy, while the exhausted waitress slept against him like he was somebody's safe place. Emma woke to gentle shaking and the sound of waves crashing against the shore. "We're here," Marco said. She sat up quickly, disoriented and embarrassed. "I fell asleep on you. I'm so sorry." "Don't be. You've had a long night." He opened the car door and offered her his hand. Emma took it, stepping out onto a circular driveway made of white stone that gleamed in the moonlight. Before her stood a mansion that looked like it belonged in a movie, not in real life. 3 stories of classic architecture, lit windows glowing warm against the night sky, manicured gardens stretching as far as she could see. "This is your house?" "One of them." Marco guided her up the front steps, where an older woman in a housekeeper's uniform waited in the doorway. "Maria, this is Emma Sullivan. She's going to be staying with us for a while. She'll need the guest suite in the East Wing, and everything she might need. Clothes, toiletries, anything." Maria nodded, her knowing eyes taking in Emma's worn jeans and cheap jacket without any judgment. "Of course, Mr. Santini. Welcome, Miss Sullivan. Let me show you to your room." Emma followed the housekeeper through halls lined with art that probably cost more than Emma would earn in a lifetime. The guest suite turned out to be larger than her entire apartment, decorated in soft blues and creams with a 4-poster bed that looked like sleeping on a cloud. "There's a bathroom through there," Maria gestured. "I'll have some clothes brought up for you. Mr. Santini wants you to be comfortable." "Thank you," Emma managed, still overwhelmed by the surreal turn her life had taken. Alone at last, she sank onto the edge of the bed and let reality crash over her. 24 hours ago, her biggest problem had been deciding whether to pay her electric bill or buy groceries. Now, she was hiding from Mafia assassins in a Hamptons mansion under the protection of the most dangerous man in New York. A knock at the door interrupted her spiral. "Come in," she called. Marco entered, having changed from his suit into dark jeans and a black sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. He was carrying a tray with tea and sandwiches. "You haven't eaten," he said, setting the tray on the table by the window. Maria made these. She makes the best sandwiches on the East Coast. Emma's stomach growled betrayingly. She joined him at the table, biting into a sandwich that tasted like heaven after her usual diet of ramen and coffee. "So," she said between bites, "what happens now?" Marco leaned back in his chair, watching her with those intense dark eyes. "Now I hunt down everyone involved in tonight's attempt on my life. It won't be pretty, and it won't be quick. You'll stay here until it's safe. That could be weeks, months. It could be." Emma sat down her sandwich. "I can't just hide here forever. I have a life, Mr. Santini. Marco. Call me Marco." He poured tea into delicate china cups. "And do you have a life worth going back to?" The question stung because it was true. What life did she have? Dead-end jobs, mounting debt, a studio apartment she could barely afford, no family, no real friends. "That's not fair," she said quietly. "No, it's not. I'm sorry." Marco ran a hand through his dark hair, looking suddenly tired. "I have a proposition for you. Hear me out before you say no." Emma wrapped her hands around the warm teacup. "I'm listening. You saved my life tonight. In my world, that creates a debt. A serious one." He leaned forward. "Work for me. Not in the business. Nothing illegal. I need someone I can trust. Someone who isn't part of this world. Someone who sees me as a human being, not just the Reaper." "Work for you doing what?" "Whatever you want. I have legitimate businesses, real estate, restaurants, import-export companies. You could manage one of my properties, work in my charity foundation, go back to school, and I'll pay for it. Whatever you need." Emma stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because you risked everything to save a stranger. Because you're the first person in years who's looked at me without fear or greed in their eyes. Because—" he paused, vulnerability flickering across his face. "Because I'm tired of being alone." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Emma saw past the dangerous reputation, past the expensive clothes and the deadly power. She saw a man who'd built walls so high he'd trapped himself inside them. "I don't know anything about your world," she said softly. "Good. Maybe you can remind me what it's like to be human." Emma should have said no. Should have demanded he take her home. Should have run from this dangerous man and his dangerous world. But something in his eyes stopped her. Something that mirrored the loneliness in her own heart. "Okay," she heard herself say. "I'll stay for now." Marco's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "Thank you, Emma." They talked until dawn, trading stories like currency. He told her about growing up in his father's shadow, inheriting an empire he'd never wanted, losing his mother to cancer when he was 16. She told him about her own losses, her father's gambling debts, her mother's early death, the nursing school dreams that had crumbled under financial reality. As the sun rose over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Emma realized she'd never felt more awake, more alive, more seen than in this moment with this impossible man. "Get some rest," Marco said finally, standing. "Tonight I have business to handle. Vincent needs to answer for his betrayal." The reminder of violence jolted Emma back to reality. "What will you do to him? What needs to be done?" His face hardened. "He tried to kill me, Emma. In my world, that has consequences." "Will you kill him?" Marco met her eyes. "Would you think less of me if I said yes?" Emma considered. By any moral standard, she should be horrified. But Vincent had tried to murder Marco, had been willing to poison him in cold blood, and Marco had shown her nothing but protection and unexpected kindness. "I think," she said carefully, "that your world has different rules than mine. I won't judge you for following them." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or relief that she wasn't naive enough to demand he be something he wasn't. "You're extraordinary, Emma Sullivan." He moved towards the door, then paused. "Sweet dreams." After he left, Emma crawled into the cloud-like bed and fell asleep, thinking about dark eyes and dangerous smiles, and the terrifying, exhilarating feeling that her life had just changed forever. Emma woke to afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she forgot where she was, reaching for the alarm clock that wasn't there. The familiar water stain on her ceiling was replaced by crown molding and a crystal chandelier. Reality crashed back. The diner, the poisoned drink, Marco Santini. She sat up, finding a silver tray on the bedside table with fresh coffee, pastries that looked bakery-made, and a small white card in masculine handwriting. Take your time. Maria will help you with anything you need. M. After showering in a bathroom larger than her old kitchen, Emma found a wardrobe full of clothes in her exact size. Jeans that actually fit, soft sweaters, comfortable shoes. Either Marco was very good at guessing, or he'd had someone research her overnight. Both options were slightly terrifying. She dressed in dark jeans and a cream sweater, then ventured out to explore. The estate was even more impressive in daylight. Marble floors, original artwork, rooms that seemed to stretch on forever. She found Maria in a sunlit kitchen that belonged in a cooking magazine, kneading dough with practiced hands. "Good morning, Miss Sullivan. Or should I say, good afternoon?" Maria smiled warmly. "Coffee, please, and call me Emma." She accepted a steaming mug. "Is Marco around?" Maria's expression flickered slightly. "Mr. Santini had business in the city. He'll be back tonight." Business. Emma remembered his words about Vincent, about consequences. Somewhere in New York right now, Marco was doing things she probably didn't want to imagine. The thought should have disgusted her. Instead, she felt a strange mixture of concern and curiosity. "Maria, how long have you worked for Marco?" 23 years. "I was his mother's housekeeper first." The older woman's voice softened. "He was just a boy when I met him, too young to carry the weight his father put on his shoulders." What was his mother like? Isabella, beautiful inside and out. She tried to keep Marco innocent as long as possible. Tried to give him a normal childhood despite. Maria gestured vaguely, encompassing the whole dark world Marco belonged to. She made him promise to always remember his humanity, to never become the monster people expected him to be. Emma sipped her coffee, pieces clicking into place. He still keeps that promise, doesn't he? As best he can in his world, you'll see. Maria returned to her dough. "He's different with you already. Lighter. I haven't seen him smile genuinely in years until last night." The words warmed Emma more than they should have. She'd known Marco less than 24 hours, but already there was something between them, something dangerous and magnetic and impossible to ignore. She spent the afternoon exploring the grounds. The estate had gardens that could swallow city blocks, a private beach, even a greenhouse full of orchids. Emma found herself in the library eventually, surrounded by thousands of books, and lost herself in a worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo until footsteps in the doorway made her look up. Marco stood watching her, still dressed in dark clothes, his face unreadable. But there was something different about him now. A tension in his shoulders, shadows in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "You're back," Emma said, closing the book. "I am." He crossed to the bar cart, pouring 2 fingers of whiskey. "Did you sleep well? Like the dead?" She winced at her own word choice. Sorry, poor phrasing. Marco's laugh was hollow. Appropriate, actually. He downed the whiskey in one swallow. "Vincent talked, gave up his co-conspirators. There were 5 others involved in the plot to kill me." "Were?" "Past tense. Yes." He poured another drink. "They won't be a threat anymore." Emma set down her book and approached him slowly. "Are you okay?" "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because you just killed 6 men. That has to affect you somehow." Marco's facade cracked slightly. "They betrayed me, tried to murder me. They deserved what they got. I'm not saying they didn't. I'm asking if you're okay." He stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "No one ever asks me that." "Well, I am." Something broke in his expression. He set down his glass and ran both hands through his hair. "No, Emma. I'm not okay. I'm never okay after nights like this. I see my mother's face, hear her voice telling me not to become a monster, and then I look at my hands and see blood. and I wonder if I already am one. Emma closed the distance between them, taking those blood-stained hands in hers. They were surprisingly warm, surprisingly gentle, despite what they'd done. You're not a monster, Marco. How can you say that? You don't know what I've done. I know you protected me when you didn't have to. I know you kept your mother's promise as best you could. I know you hate the violence even as you carry it out. She squeezed his hands. Monsters don't question themselves. They don't feel regret. Marco pulled her closer, his forehead coming to rest against hers. They stood like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, Emma's hands still holding his. You're going to ruin me, he whispered. Going to make me want things I can't have. A normal life. Peace. Someone who sees past the blood. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. He kissed her then, sudden and desperate, like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. Emma should have pulled away, should have remembered this was insane. But his lips tasted like whiskey and regret and something sweeter underneath, and she found herself kissing him back with equal desperation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marco rested his hands on either side of her face. This is a terrible idea. The worst. Agreed. Emma laughed softly. You should run from me, from this life, from everything I represent. Probably. But you're not going to, are you? Emma smiled despite everything. No, I don't think I am. Marco kissed her again. Slower this time. Tender in a way that made her heart ache. This man, this dangerous, broken man, was kissing her like she was something precious. Like she was the answer to questions he'd stopped asking years ago. Stay with me tonight, he murmured against her lips. Just be here. I don't want to be alone with the ghosts. So Emma stayed. They ate dinner on the terrace overlooking the ocean, Maria serving pasta that tasted like love itself. They talked about everything and nothing, avoiding the heavy subjects in favor of discovering each other's favorite movies, childhood dreams, small, silly things that felt enormous in their intimacy. As night fell, Marco took her hand and led her through the gardens, pointing out constellations, telling her stories his mother had told him about the stars. Emma leaned against him, breathing in his cologne, feeling safer than she had in years, despite the absurdity of finding safety in the arms of a mafia boss. Thank you, Marco said as they stood under the stars. For what? For seeing me, the real me underneath everything else. He turned to face her, moonlight catching in his dark eyes. I know this is crazy. I know we barely know each other. But Emma, I feel more alive with you than I have in a decade. I feel it too, she admitted. It terrifies me. Good. Fear means you're smart enough to understand the danger. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. But are you brave enough to stay anyway? Emma thought about her old life, the loneliness and struggle and quiet desperation. Then she looked at Marco, this complicated man who killed without hesitation, but kissed with devastating gentleness. This shouldn't work. By every logical measure, this was disaster waiting to happen. But when had Emma's life ever been logical? Yes, she said. I'm brave enough. Marco smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, the shadows in his eyes lightened. Then let's be brave together. He kissed her under the stars while waves crashed against the shore, and Emma felt the last of her resistance crumble. She was falling for him, this impossible man in this impossible situation. And as terrifying as it was, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. 3 weeks passed in a strange, suspended reality. Emma lived in the estate like a princess in a tower, protected and pampered, but increasingly restless. Marco came and went on business, sometimes returning with shadows in his eyes, sometimes with rare smiles just for her. They fell into a rhythm. Breakfast together when he was home, long conversations over coffee. He taught her to speak basic Italian, laughing at her pronunciation. She made him watch romantic comedies he pretended to hate but secretly loved. They kissed in the library, on the beach, against the kitchen counter when Maria wasn't looking. But they never went further, never crossed that final line. Marco held back, like he was afraid one more step would shatter whatever fragile thing was growing between them. I have to go into the city today, Marco said one morning in early November. Come with me? Emma looked up from her eggs, surprised. Into the city? But you said it wasn't safe. My men have neutralized the remaining threats. It's safe now. Besides, he reached across the table, taking her hand. I want to show you my world, the real parts of it, not just the violence. 2 hours later, Emma sat in the Mercedes, watching New York blur past the windows. Marco sat beside her, unusually quiet, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. They stopped first at a restaurant in Little Italy, a place called Isabella's, with faded awnings and checkered tablecloths. An elderly man emerged from the kitchen, his face lighting up when he saw Marco. Marco, final meant. He embraced. Marco greeted Yeppy like a son. Then his eyes fell on Emma. And who is this beautiful girl? He asked warmly. This is Emma, Marco replied. Emma, meet Yeppy. He was my mother's best friend. Josip wouldn't hear of them leaving without eating, and he insisted on feeding them, bringing out plate after plate of homemade pasta. He regaled them with stories about Isabella Santini and the young boy Marco used to be. Emma watched Marco's face soften as he listened, and she saw a glimpse of the person he might have been in a different life. Your mother, Josip said seriously, his eyes twinkling. She would have adored Emma. She always said you needed someone with a good heart to balance out all that darkness inside you. After lunch, Marco took Emma to a youth center in Brooklyn, a renovated warehouse buzzing with kids playing basketball and diligently doing their homework. A woman, somewhere in her 50s, approached, giving Marco a warm, tight hug. Kids, Mr. Santini is here, she announced. A dozen children swarmed them, shouting greetings and excitedly showing off their drawings and test scores. Marco knew every single name. He asked about siblings and pets and favorite subjects. Here, he wasn't the Reaper. He was just Marco, the man who built this place, who funded their scholarships and after-school programs. You do this? Emma asked, her voice filled with wonder, as she watched him patiently help a little girl with her math homework. My mother started it, he explained. I just keep it running. He looked up at her, his expression earnest. These kids deserve better than what they were born into. Someone should give them a chance. Emma felt something crack open in her chest, a warmth spreading through her. This man, this supposedly cold-blooded killer, was gently explaining fractions to an 8-year-old girl with juice stains on her shirt. Their last stop was a cemetery in Queens. Marco led Emma to a simple marble headstone engraved with Isabella Maria Santini, beloved mother taken too soon. He knelt, carefully placing fresh white roses on the grave. Hi, Mama, he said softly. I brought someone to meet you, someone special. Emma's eyes stung with tears. She knelt beside him, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. I think I'm in love with her, Marco continued, his voice rough with emotion. I know it's fast. I know it's crazy, but she makes me remember who I wanted to be, who you wanted me to be. He touched the marble gently, his voice thick with feeling. I hope I'm making you proud. I hope I haven't strayed too far from your lessons. Emma couldn't help herself. She gently turned his face toward her and kissed him, tasting salt and sadness and something achingly sweet. She'd be proud of you? Emma whispered, her voice full of emotion. How could she not be? On the drive back to the Hamptons, Marco held her close in the back seat of the car. Thank you for today, for seeing all of me. Thank you for showing me. Emma rested her head on his shoulder, a newfound understanding dawning on her. I understand now why you do what you do. You're trying to protect the good things in a bad world. Does that make it better? Does that excuse the violence? Maybe not excuse, but it makes you human. Complicated. Real. She tilted her head up to look at him, her gaze unwavering. I told you before, Marco. You're not a monster. Monsters don't build youth centers or visit their mother's grave or worry about whether they're still the person she wanted them to be. Marco kissed the top of her head, his touch tender. What am I going to do with you, Emma Sullivan? He paused, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. Love me. If you meant what you told your mother. He went very still, holding his breath. You heard that? Emma asked, her heart pounding in her chest. I did. And Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment, the precipice. Once she stepped off, there was no going back to safe ground. And I think I'm falling in love with you, too, she confessed. Even though it's insane. Even though we've only known each other a few weeks. Even though your world terrifies me. I can't seem to help it. Marco made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. A release of pent-up emotion. He pulled her into his lap, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. Say it again, he urged, his voice thick with emotion. I'm falling in love with you, Marco Santini? She repeated, her voice filled with conviction. He kissed her then, like the world was ending, deep and claiming and tender all at once. Emma melted into him, her hands tangling in his hair, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could feel it. When we get home, he murmured against her lips, his breath warm on her skin. I'm going to make love to you, show you exactly how much you mean to me. Is that okay? Emma breathed, her voice barely a whisper. More than okay, Emma breathed. The drive back seemed to take forever and no time at all. An eternity of anticipation and a fleeting moment of pure, unadulterated desire. They stumbled through the estate's doors, mouths fused together, hands grabbing and pulling and exploring. Maria appeared in the hall, took one look at them, and smiled knowingly before discreetly disappearing. Marco's bedroom was all dark wood and masculine elegance, but Emma barely noticed anything beyond him. He laid her down on the bed with a reverence that made her throat tight, kissing every inch of exposed skin like she was sacred. Tell me if you want to stop, he said, hovering over her, his gaze intense. Tell me if this is too much, too fast. Emma pulled him down to her, silencing his doubts. The only thing that would be too much is if you stopped now. They made love slowly, deliberately, learning each other's bodies. Whispered endearments mixing with soft gasps and sighs. Marco touched her like she was precious china, like she might break if he wasn't careful, until Emma demanded more, harder, deeper. Then he gave her everything, his control fracturing into raw need. Afterward, they lay tangled together, sweaty and satisfied, their bodies intertwined. Emma's head rested on Marco's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow and steady beneath her ear. I love you, he said into the comfortable silence, his voice filled with sincerity. I know it's crazy. I know it's too soon. But Emma, I love you. I love you, too, she whispered, her heart overflowing. She tilted her head up to kiss his jaw, her lips lingering against his skin. My dangerous, complicated, impossible man. Marco smiled against her hair, his grip tightening around her. What are we doing? Falling in love like this? Something crazy? Something right? Emma snuggled closer, finding comfort in his embrace. Something that feels like coming home. He tightened his arms around her, and for the first time in years, Marco Santini felt peace. Not the temporary calm between storms, but real peace. The kind that settled deep in his bones and quieted the turmoil within. The kind his mother had always wanted for him. Outside, the ocean crashed against the shore, its rhythmic roar a constant presence. Inside, two broken people held each other and dared to believe in second chances, in the possibility of a future filled with love and light. Emma woke to an empty bed and muffled voices downstairs, a sense of unease settling in her stomach. Morning light filtered softly through the curtains, and for a moment she luxuriated in the memory of the night before, the passion and tenderness they had shared. Her body ached in the best way, marked by Marco's gentle claiming, a reminder of their newfound intimacy. She dressed quickly in one of his shirts, its oversized fit comforting against her skin, and followed the voices to Marco's study. The door was slightly ajar, and she paused when she heard the anger in his tone, a cold fury that sent a shiver down her spine. I don't care what Dimitri wants. The answer is no, Marco stated firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. Boss, he's insistent, a voice replied. a hint of worry in the tone. It was Tony, one of Marco's lieutenants. Says if you don't meet with him, there will be consequences. Let him threaten, Marco retorted, his voice hard. I won't compromise my principles, not even for peace with the Russians. Emma knocked softly, pushing the door open slightly. 4 men stood around Marco's desk, all turning to stare at her, their expressions unreadable. Marco's face softened immediately when he saw her, a flicker of warmth replacing the coldness in his eyes. Emma, you're awake. He dismissed his men with a curt gesture, his attention now solely focused on her. We'll continue this later. When they were alone, Emma crossed to him, her steps hesitant. Trouble? She asked, her voice laced with concern. Nothing I can't handle, he assured her, trying to downplay the situation. He pulled her onto his lap, burying his face in her neck, inhaling her scent, finding solace in her presence. Dmitry Volov, head of the Russian operations in New York, wants to meet. He's been pushing into my territory, trying to force a partnership. And you don't want to partner with him? Emma asked, already knowing the answer. He traffics women, Emma? Marco said, his voice hardening with disgust. Young girls from Eastern Europe promise jobs and futures, then enslaved. Marco's voice hardened, his jaw clenched tight. That's a line I won't cross. My family has never dealt in human lives. Emma understood then. Even Marco's world had rules, twisted as they might be. He dealt in protection, in illegal gambling, in things she didn't want to know about. But he had boundaries, principles he wouldn't violate. What will you do? She asked, her eyes searching his. Meet with him, he replied, his gaze resolute. Make it clear that if he continues, we'll have war. He touched her face gently, his thumb caressing her cheekbone. This is the part of my life I wanted to shield you from. I know what you are, Marco, she said softly, her voice filled with understanding. You don't have to hide it, but I want to. When I'm with you, I want to be just a man in love, not the Reaper. Emma kissed him softly, her lips brushing against his. You're both, and I love both, she said, her voice filled with sincerity. The meeting with Dimitri was set for that evening at a neutral location, a warehouse owned by one of the Irish families. Marco tried to convince Emma to stay at the estate, but she refused, her decision unwavering. If this is your life, I want to understand it. Let me come. It could be dangerous, he warned, his brow furrowed with concern. Everything about loving you is dangerous, she countered, her voice firm. Let me be there. So, Emma found herself in the Mercedes again, this time with 4 armed guards and Marco beside her, his presence both comforting and intimidating. The warehouse was cold and industrial, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that cast long, ominous shadows. Men with guns stood guard at every entrance, their faces grim and unreadable. Dmitry Volkov was younger than Emma expected, maybe 40, with pale eyes and a smile that never reached them, a chilling facade. He sat at a metal table with his own guards flanking him, a picture of calculated power. Marco Santini, I've heard so much about the Reaper, Dmitry greeted, his English carrying a heavy Russian accent. And you brought your pretty waitress. How domestic. Emma felt Marco tense beside her, his hand tightening on hers under the table, a silent warning. Let's skip the pleasantries, Dmitry, Marco said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. I'm not interested in your partnership. That's unfortunate, Dmitry replied, his smile widening slightly. Together we could control all of New York. At what cost? Marco countered, his eyes narrowed. You want me to look the other way while you destroy lives? I won't do it. Dmitry's smile sharpened, revealing a hint of the darkness beneath. Such moral high ground for a man who's killed dozens, he sneered. Tell me, does your waitress know how many men you've murdered? Does she know about the rival family you wiped out 5 years ago? Women and children included. Emma's blood ran cold at his words, a chill spreading through her veins. Marco's face went blank, his expression carefully controlled, masking the rage simmering beneath the surface. That's a lie, Marco stated, his voice dangerously quiet. Is it? Dmitri challenged, his eyes glinting with malice. Ask him, pretty waitress. Ask him about the Moretti family. About little Sophia Moretti, age 6, found with a bullet in her head. Enough? Marco snapped, his voice deadly quiet. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Dmitri mocked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You want to play the righteous crime lord, but your hands are just as bloody as mine. Marco looked like he might kill Dmitri right there, his body coiled with barely contained fury. Emma touched his arm, feeling him vibrate with rage, desperately trying to defuse the situation. Let's go, she urged, her voice barely a whisper. The ride back to the estate was silent, thick with unspoken tension. Marco stared out the window, his jaw clenched tight, refusing to meet Emma's eyes, lost in his own dark thoughts. She wanted to ask, wanted to demand the truth, but fear kept her silent, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Back at the mansion, Marco headed straight for his study, grabbing a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet. Emma followed, closing the door behind them, the weight of the unspoken hanging heavy in the air. Tell me the truth about the Moretts, she finally said, her voice trembling slightly. Marco downed his whiskey in one gulp, then poured another, his hands shaking slightly. You want the truth? Fine, he said, his voice rough with emotion. The Moretti family tried to kill me, bombed my car, my driver died. 2 innocent bystanders. So yes, I retaliated. I sent my men to take out the entire family. He paused, his voice cracking with pain. And the little girl, Sophia, she wasn't supposed to be there. The intelligence said she was at her grandmother's. But she'd come home sick from school that day. My men, they didn't know. They went in shooting, and when it was over, she was dead. Emma felt physically sick at his words, the reality of the situation hitting her with full force. This was real now, not abstract violence, but the senseless death of a child, a life cut short by the brutal consequences of his world. I see her every night, Marco continued, staring blankly at his glass, his voice barely a whisper. Her face, her eyes. She'd be 13 now, would have had her whole life ahead of her. Instead, she's dead because of me. Did you kill her yourself? Emma asked, her voice barely audible. Does it matter? He retorted, his voice laced with self-loathing. I gave the order. Her blood is on my hands regardless. Emma didn't know what to say, her mind reeling from the revelation. She'd known Marco was dangerous, known he'd killed people. But this was different. A line crossed, an innocent life lost in the crossfire of his war. Say something, Marco demanded, his voice laced with desperation. Yell at me. Tell me I'm a monster. Tell me Dmitri was right. I don't know what to say, Emma admitted, her voice filled with anguish. Then let me say it for you, Marco said, his voice hard. I'm exactly what you feared. Killer. A man with so much blood on his hands that no amount of good deeds can wash them clean. You should leave, Emma. Get as far from me as possible. Emma's mind raced, her thoughts a chaotic jumble of fear and conflicting emotions. She should leave, should run from this man and never look back, protect herself from the darkness that threatened to consume them both. But she remembered Josep's stories, the kids at the youth center, Marco kneeling at his mother's grave, the moments of tenderness and vulnerability he had shown her. She remembered the way he touched her, the weight of guilt he carried, the good man she knew existed beneath the hardened exterior. Did you mourn her? Emma asked quietly, her voice cutting through the silence. Marco looked up, surprised by the question, his eyes searching hers. Every day, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. I set up a trust fund for her surviving relatives. I visit her grave on her birthday. His voice broke, the pain of his past overwhelming him. I named the youth center after her, Sophia's place. So maybe some good could come from something so terrible. Tears rolled down Emma's cheeks, her heart aching for the little girl and the man who carried her memory. You're not a monster, Marco, she said softly, her voice filled with conviction. How can you say that? He asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Because monsters don't mourn, Emma replied, her voice firm. They don't carry guilt. They don't try to make amends. She crossed to him, taking the glass from his hands, her touch gentle and reassuring. What happened to Sophia was tragic and terrible, but it was also an accident in a war you didn't start. That doesn't make it right, but it also doesn't negate everything else about you. Emma cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her, her gaze unwavering. You're a man who made a terrible mistake and has been trying to atone for it ever since. That's not a monster. That's a human being. Marco pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his body trembling with emotion. I don't deserve you, he whispered, his voice filled with anguish. Maybe not, Emma replied, her voice soft. But I'm staying anyway. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other close while the weight of the past pressed down on them both, their silence filled with unspoken understanding and a shared burden of grief. Emma knew this changed things, knew she could never again ignore the full reality of Marco's world, the violence and the darkness that permeated his life. But she also knew she loved him, blood-stained hands and guilty conscience and all, and she was willing to face whatever came their way, as long as they faced it together. I need you to understand something, Marco said finally, his voice grave. This life, my world, it will always demand things from me. I will always have blood on my hands. If you stay, you'll have to live with that. I know, Emma replied, her voice resolute. And you can handle it? Marco asked, his eyes searching hers, needing reassurance. Emma pulled back to look at him, her expression determined. I don't know, but I want to try for you. For us. Marco kissed her then, desperate and claiming, like he needed to prove she was real, that she was still his despite everything, his touch a desperate plea for acceptance and forgiveness. Emma kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all her complicated love into the connection of their lips, her heart overflowing with a mixture of fear and hope. I love you, he gasped between kisses, his voice raw with emotion. God help me. I love you so much. I love you, too, Emma whispered, her voice filled with sincerity. All of you, even the broken parts. They made love on the couch in his study, urgent and raw, both needing the physical connection to ground them, to reassure themselves that they were still real, that their love could survive the darkness that threatened to engulf them. Afterward, Marco held Emma close, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder, finding comfort in her presence. Dimitri won't let this go, he said quietly, his voice laced with concern. He'll push until we go to war. Then we'll face it together, Emma replied, her voice firm and unwavering. Marco kissed her forehead, his grip tightening around her. Together. I like the sound of that. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the Atlantic, mirroring the turmoil within their hearts. Inside, two lovers held each other and tried to forget, just for a moment, the blood and violence that would always shadow their love, clinging to the hope that their connection could somehow transcend the darkness that surrounded them. The war with Dimitri started 3 days later with a bomb in one of Marco's restaurants, a brutal declaration of open conflict. Emma was at the estate when she heard the news, watching the news report of the explosion in Little Italy, the familiar storefront reduced to rubble, lives shattered in an instant. Yeppi's place reduced to rubble. Her heart stopped in her chest, fear gripping her like a vice. Marco had been supposed to meet just there that afternoon. A casual meeting turned into a potential tragedy. She called his phone frantically, relief flooding through her when he answered, his voice a reassuring sound amidst the chaos. I'm okay. I was running late, thank God, Marco said, his voice tight with fury and lingering shock. Yeppi is in the hospital. 3rd-degree burns, but he'll survive. Marco, I'm so sorry, Emma said, her voice filled with anguish. This is war now, Marco replied, his voice hard. Dimitri made his move. Now I make mine. Emma heard the change in his voice, the shift from the loving man she knew to the cold, calculating reaper, a transformation that sent a shiver down her spine. Come home, please, she pleaded, her voice laced with desperation. "I can't." "Not yet," Marco replied, his voice firm. "Stay inside the estate. Double security is already on its way." The line went dead, leaving Emma alone with her fear and the chilling realization that the man she loved was now fully immersed in a brutal war. A battle for control that threatened to consume everything in its path. Emma spent the next 12 hours pacing anxiously, glued to the television, watching news reports of escalating violence across New York, a city on the brink of chaos. A Russian gambling den burned to the ground. A retaliatory strike. 2 of Dimitri's lieutenants found dead in their cars, their bodies riddled with bullets. Marco's people striking back with precision and fury, their actions swift and merciless. Marco finally returned after midnight, his presence a stark contrast to the elegant surroundings of the mansion. He was covered in soot and smelled like smoke, his face grim and weary, the weight of the world etched in his lines. Emma ran to him, checking for injuries, her emotions a chaotic mix of relief and anger, gratitude and fear warring within her chest. "You could have been killed," she said, her voice trembling. "But I wasn't," Marco replied, his voice flat, his gaze unwavering. He held her face in his dirty hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I'm sorry I scared you. What happens now?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Now?" Marco repeated, his jaw clenched tight. "Now I finish this before more innocent people get hurt, before this war consumes everything I care about." Over the next week, Emma watched Marco transform into someone else, a man driven by a singular purpose, a ruthless warrior willing to do whatever it took to protect what was his. He was still loving with her, still tender in their private moments, but cold and calculating when dealing with the war, his heart shrouded in a layer of ice. He barely slept, coordinating strikes, moving pieces on a chessboard only he could see, his mind constantly working, strategizing, planning. The violence escalated, the city caught in the crossfire of a deadly feud. More bombs, more shootings, more lives lost in the name of power and revenge. Emma felt helpless watching the news, knowing Marco was out there in the midst of it all, facing danger at every turn, his life hanging precariously in the balance. She found distraction in the youth center, volunteering to help with the kids, finding solace in their innocence and hope. If she couldn't stop the violence, at least she could do something positive, a small act of defiance against the darkness that threatened to consume them. The children loved her, especially little Maria, a 9-year-old girl with Sophia's dark hair and bright smile, a constant reminder of the tragic consequences of Marco's world. "Miss Emma, will Mr. Marco come visit soon?" Maria asked one afternoon, her innocent eyes searching Emma's. "He's very busy right now, sweetheart," Emma replied, her heart clenching with a mix of guilt and sadness. "Because of the bad men on TV?" Maria asked, her voice filled with childlike curiosity. Emma's heart ached at her words. These kids weren't naive. They understood the world they lived in, the violence and the danger that surrounded them. "Yes, because of the bad men," Emma confirmed, her voice gentle. "My brother says Mr. Marco is a bad man too," Maria said, her brow furrowed with confusion. Emma knelt down to Maria's level, her gaze earnest. "Mr. Marco does things to protect people," she explained, her voice filled with conviction. "Sometimes those things seem bad, but he has a good heart. Don't ever doubt that." That night, Marco came home with blood on his shirt, his face pale and drawn, his eyes haunted by the horrors he had witnessed. Not his own, he assured her, but Emma's hands still shook as she helped him undress, her heart pounding with fear. She ran a bath and gently washed the evidence of violence from his skin, the crimson stains a stark reminder of the life he led. "3 more of Dimitri's men are dead," he said flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. "We're winning, but the cost is too high, always too high." He pulled Emma into the bathtub with him, fully clothed, just needing her close, seeking solace in her presence. "I saw a kid today," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Couldn't have been more than 12, standing on a corner watching our convoy pass, and he looked at me with such hate, like I was the devil himself." Marco flinched at the memory, his guilt evident in his eyes. "Maybe to him you are," Emma said softly, her voice filled with understanding. Marco flinched at her words, his gaze searching hers, seeking reassurance. "Is that how you see me now?" he asked, his voice laced with vulnerability. "No," Emma replied, her voice firm and unwavering. "I see a man trying to protect what's his, trying to stop a monster who's worse than he'll ever be." She kissed his jaw, her lips lingering against his skin. "But I also see a man being consumed by violence, a man who's losing himself in the darkness." "When does it end, Marco?" Emma asked, her voice filled with desperation. "When Dimitri is dead or gone," Marco replied, his voice hard. "There's no other way. This war will only end when one of us is gone." The climax came 2 weeks later, a culmination of weeks of escalating violence and mounting tension. Intelligence suggested Dimitri was planning something big, a strike meant to end the war decisively, a final act of desperation. Marco's people worked around the clock to discover the target, their efforts fueled by a sense of urgency and a desire to protect the innocent. Emma was at the youth center when Tony burst through the doors, his face pale with fear, his words sending a chill down her spine. "Dimitri knows about this place," he said, his voice breathless. "Knows Marco cares about it. He's coming here." Emma's blood ran cold at his words, her heart pounding with terror. The children, they were innocent, caught in the crossfire of a war they didn't understand. "We're evacuating everyone," Tony shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "Move! Get the kids out of here." Chaos erupted as the adults scrambled to evacuate the children, their movements frantic and desperate. Emma helped the terrified kids toward the back exits, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing with fear. Little Maria clung to her hand, her small body trembling with fear, her eyes wide with terror. "I'm scared, Miss Emma," Maria whimpered, her voice barely audible above the din. "I know, sweetheart, but we're getting out of here," Emma reassured, her voice filled with false bravado. They'd almost reached the exit when the front windows exploded inward, the shattering glass raining down on them like a deadly hailstorm. Men in black tactical gear poured through the shattered windows, their weapons raised, their faces masked, their intentions clear. Tony and Marco's other guards opened fire, the sound of gunfire echoing in the enclosed space, a deafening cacophony of destruction. Emma threw herself over Maria, covering the little girl with her body, shielding her from the deadly hail of bullets, her own life a secondary concern. Gunfire echoed in the enclosed space, the air thick with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, praying for mercy, for protection, for Marco to somehow know she needed him, her silent plea a desperate whisper in the chaos. Then more gunfire erupted, the sound of different weapons, a sign of reinforcements arriving. And then Marco's voice, clear and commanding, shouting orders amidst the chaos, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Emma risked a look, her eyes darting through the smoke, seeing Marco leading a team through the chaos, taking down Dimitri's men with lethal precision, his movements swift and deadly, a force to be reckoned with. In 3 minutes, it was over, the sudden silence a stark contrast to the deafening cacophony that had preceded it. Dimitri's men were dead or fleeing, their attack thwarted by Marco's swift and decisive action. Marco found Emma and Maria huddled behind an overturned table, both unharmed but shaking, their faces pale with shock and fear. "Thank God," he said, his voice filled with relief, his eyes searching them for injuries. He pulled them both into his arms, holding them tight, his grip fierce and protective. "Thank God you're safe." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second, a sign that help was on its way. Marco's men were already disappearing, melting into the shadows, their presence a silent testament to the world he inhabited. But Marco stayed, holding Emma and Maria close until the little girl's mother arrived, sobbing with relief, her gratitude evident in her tear-filled eyes. After everyone was evacuated and statements were given to sympathetic cops on Marco's payroll, he and Emma sat alone in the damaged center, surrounded by the wreckage of the attack, the silence heavy with unspoken emotions. Emma's hands wouldn't stop shaking, her body still trembling with adrenaline and fear. "He tried to kill children," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her eyes wide with horror. "He was willing to murder innocent kids to get to you." "I know," Marco replied, his face carved from stone, his expression devoid of emotion, the coldness of the Reaper descending upon him. "And that's why this ends tonight. This war will end once and for all." Dmitri crossed every line, his actions unforgivable. "He's done. He's sealed his fate." "What are you going to do?" Emma asked, her voice filled with dread, knowing what was coming. "What I should have done from the start," Marco replied, his voice hard and resolute. "I'm going to kill him myself. I'm going to end this war once and for all." Emma grabbed his hand, her touch desperate, pleading with him to reconsider. "Let me come with you," she begged, her voice filled with anguish. "Absolutely not," Marco replied, his voice firm and unwavering. "This is my fight, and I won't risk your life." "Marco, please," Emma pleaded, her voice filled with desperation. "I need to see this through. I need to understand fully what your justice looks like. I need to witness the end of this war." He studied her face for a long moment, his eyes searching hers, weighing the consequences of her request. "This isn't a game, Emma," he warned, his voice grave. "What I'm about to do will haunt you. It will change you." "Then let it haunt me," Emma replied, her voice firm. "But don't shut me out. Not anymore. I want to be there for you no matter what happens. I want to share this burden with you." Finally, Marco nodded, his decision made. "Okay," he said, his voice barely audible. "But you stay in the car. No matter what happens, you stay in the car. Promise me, Emma." The warehouse where they'd first met Dmitri was burning when they arrived, the flames illuminating the night sky, a symbol of the destruction and violence that had consumed their lives. Marco's men had struck first, killing Dmitri's guards, trapping him inside the inferno, sealing his fate. Through the smoke, Emma could see Dmitri tied to a chair, beaten and bloody, but conscious, his eyes filled with fear and desperation. Marco approached him slowly, his movements deliberate and menacing, pulling out his gun, the glint of steel a promise of death. Emma watched from the car, her heart in her throat, her stomach churning with nausea, her mind struggling to reconcile the man she loved with the ruthless killer before her. "You tried to kill children," Marco said, his voice carrying in the night air, cold and devoid of emotion. "Innocent children. There's no coming back from that. You've crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. You're no better." Dmitri spat, his face contorted with hatred, his voice laced with defiance. "You killed Sofia Moretti. You're a hypocrite." "Yes, I did," Marco replied, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes filled with pain. "And I carry that guilt every day. But there's a difference between a tragic accident and deliberately targeting children. You knew they were there. You wanted to hurt them to hurt me. In war, there are no innocents," Dmitri retorted, his voice filled with venom. "Everyone is a target. Everyone is expendable." "Wrong," Marco countered, his voice hard, his gaze unwavering. "In war, the innocent are all that matter. They are the reason we fight. They are the future we are trying to protect." Marco pressed the gun to Dmitri's forehead, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You don't deserve a quick death," he said, his voice cold and devoid of mercy. "But I'm not a monster like you, so I'll make this fast. I won't let you suffer." He pulled the trigger, the sound of the gunshot shattering the silence, the finality of the act echoing in the night air. Dmitri slumped forward, dead before he hit the ground, his life extinguished in an instant, his reign of terror brought to a brutal end. Marco stood there for a moment, gun still raised, his shoulders rigid, his face a mask of emotions, a mixture of grief and rage and a profound sense of weariness. Then he slowly lowered the weapon and walked back to the car, his face carefully blank, his movements mechanical, his spirit weary. Emma met him at the door, her arms outstretched, offering comfort and support. He shook against her, the adrenaline and emotion finally breaking through his control, the weight of the past crashing down upon him. "It's over," she whispered, her voice filled with compassion, her arms holding him tight. "It's finally over. For now," Marco replied, his voice barely audible, his gaze lost in the darkness. "There will always be another Dmitri, another threat, another war. The cycle of violence would never truly end. Then we'll face them together, one at a time," Emma said, her voice firm, her resolve unwavering. "We'll face whatever comes our way, as long as we face it together." Marco pulled back to look at her, his eyes searching hers, seeking reassurance. "You still want to stay?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "After everything you've seen? After witnessing the darkness and violence that consumes my life?" Emma thought about Sophia, about little Maria crying in her arms, about Yeppi's burns and the blood on Marco's hands, the innocent lives lost in the crossfire of his war. She thought about the man who'd held her through nightmares, who'd built a youth center to atone for his sins, who carried. As dawn painted the city sky, their estate stood silent, a testament to their unconventional love. Emma and Marco, bound together by a past woven with violence and choices that could never be taken back. Theirs wasn't a fairy tale, nor would it ever be simple or pristine. Yet it was undeniably theirs, and in that moment that was more than enough. 3 months had passed since Dimitri's death. Emma found herself standing in the rebuilt youth center, watching children's laughter fill the air. The renovations had consumed weeks, but the result was a space even better than before, fortified with reinforced walls and state-of-the-art security systems. Marco materialized beside her, his arm finding its way around her waist. "You've done an amazing job with this place. We did it together." Emma leaned into his embrace. "The kids are absolutely loving the new computer lab." "Good. They deserve every possible advantage." He kissed her temple, then continued, "I have something I want to show you." He led her to his car and drove to a neighborhood unfamiliar to Emma, a place called Brooks. The streets were lined with trees, the houses were Victorian with inviting wraparound porches, and couples strolled hand in hand in the park. "Where are we?" she asked, curiosity piqued. "Brooks. One of the few neighborhoods that isn't under my control." He parked in front of a stunning brownstone. "Come on." The interior of the house was breathtaking. Gleaming hardwood floors, soaring ceilings, and a kitchen that would bring tears of joy to Maria's eyes. The second floor held 4 bedrooms, each bathed in the warm glow of the afternoon sun. "Marco, whose house is this?" He turned to her, a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. "Could be ours if you want it to be." Emma's breath hitched. "What? I bought it for us, for a chance at a normal life. As normal as we can be anyway." He took her hands in his. "I know the estate is beautiful, but it's my father's place, my family's. This could be ours, a fresh start." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "You'd leave the estate? I'd do anything for you. Besides," he added with a smile, "Maria has been dropping hints about wanting to retire. She deserves some peace, not to be managing a crime lord's household." Emma laughed through her tears. "Are you asking me to move in with you, Mr. Santini?" Marco dropped to one knee, producing a small velvet box from his pocket. "Actually, I'm asking you to marry me." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Inside the box was a ring, its design simple yet elegant, a single diamond catching the light. "I know this is fast. I know my world is dangerous and complicated, and that we'll never have a completely normal life. But Emma, you're my everything. You make me want to be a better man, to do better things. You see the man I was meant to be, not just the monster I became. Marry me, Emma. Build a life with me. Let me spend every day trying to deserve you." Emma was now crying freely, tears of pure joy streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, of course I'll marry you." Marco slipped the ring onto her finger, then swept her into his arms, spinning her around the empty living room. "You've made me the happiest man alive. Even though I come with no family, no dowry, nothing but student debt, and a nursing degree I never finished, you come with a heart big enough to love a broken man like me. That's worth more than anything. He gently set her down. And speaking of that nursing degree, I have one more surprise for you. He handed her an envelope. Inside was an acceptance letter to Columbia's nursing program, along with a scholarship that covered full tuition. Marco, I can't accept this. It's not from me exactly. Well, it is, but it's through the Isabella Santini Foundation. She always believed in education, in giving people second chances. Let me give you yours. Emma wrapped her arms around him, overwhelmed by love, gratitude, and the sheer improbability of her life's transformation. 6 months prior, she had been a struggling waitress, devoid of hope or a future. Now, she was engaged to a man who saw her, truly saw her, and who desired to build a life together. When do you want to get married? She asked, her voice filled with emotion. Tomorrow, next week, whenever you want. Just not too long from now. I've waited my whole life for you, Emma. I don't want to wait any longer. They decided on a spring wedding, a small ceremony in the garden of their new home. Over the next few months, Emma balanced nursing school, wedding planning, and settling into their life in Brooklyn Heights. True to his word, Marco diligently separated his business affairs from their home life. He maintained an office downtown for his meetings, came home at reasonable hours, and took Emma out for dinner and movies like any normal couple. The undercurrent of violence and danger still existed, but he shielded her from its worst manifestations. Emma excelled in nursing school, discovering a passion for pediatric care. She completed clinical rotations at Children's Hospital, returning home with stories about the children she had helped, the lives she had touched. Marco listened intently, his pride in the woman she was becoming evident. You're glowing, he remarked one evening as they cooked dinner together. School is good for me. It feels right, like I'm finally doing what I was meant to do, Emma replied, stirring the pasta sauce. I've been considering specializing in trauma pediatrics, partly because of Sophia, and partly because of all the kids at the center who've witnessed too much, experienced too much violence. They need advocates, people who understand what they've been through. Marco pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on the top of her head. Have I told you lately how proud I am of you? You tell me every day. Good, because I am endlessly proud. The wedding day arrived in a blur of white flowers and soft music. Emma wore a simple yet elegant dress, perfectly understated. Marco looked breathtaking in his tuxedo, his eyes glistening with tears as she walked toward him. Yeppy officiated, sharing stories about Isabella and how she had dreamed of this day for her son. Maria served as Emma's matron of honor. The youth center kids scattered rose petals as she walked down the aisle. It was a small, intimate, and perfect celebration. I, Marco Santini, take you, Emma Sullivan, to be my wife, Marco declared, his voice thick with emotion. I promise to love you through darkness and light, to protect you, to honor you, to be worthy of the faith you've placed in me. You saved my life that night in the diner, and you've been saving me every day since. I am yours completely and forever. Emma recited her own vows through happy tears, promising to stand by him, to always see the good in him, to build a life of meaning together. When they kissed as husband and wife, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers. Emma felt as if she were floating, anchored only by Marco's hands on her waist and his smile against her lips. The reception was a scene of joyful chaos. The youth center kids performed a dance routine. Yeppy got tipsy and regaled everyone with increasingly embarrassing stories about young Marco, and Maria cried tears of happiness, feeding everyone until they could barely move. As the sun began to set and the guests started to depart, Marco led Emma to the edge of the garden, away from the crowd. Happy? He asked, his voice full of wonder. I love you more than I ever thought possible. He pulled her close. Thank you, Emma, for taking a chance on me, for seeing past the reputation and the violence to the man underneath. Thank you for letting me in, for building this beautiful life with me. They swayed together to the music drifting from the house, two people who, against all odds, fit together perfectly. A mafia boss and a waitress turned nurse, violence and healing, darkness and light. I love you, Mrs. Santini, Marco whispered in her ear. I love you too, Mr. Santini, my impossible, wonderful, complicated man." Above them, the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky. Emma reflected on the path that had led her to this moment, from that failing diner to this feeling of absolute bliss. It had been terrifying and dangerous, a path she never could have predicted. Yet she wouldn't change a single step. "What are you thinking about?" Marco asked, sensing her distant gaze. "About poison in a glass, about how one moment of courage changed everything." Marco smiled, understanding perfectly. "Best decision you ever made, grabbing my wrist that night." "Best decision we both made," Emma corrected. "You chose to protect me, to let me in. That took courage, too." They remained in the garden until the last guest had left, until Maria shooed them away with instructions to enjoy their honeymoon. A week in Italy, visiting the village where Marco's mother had been born, eating pasta, drinking wine, and pretending, for just a little while, that they were simply two people deeply in love. As they drove away from their home, Emma looked back at the brownstone, bathed in a warm, inviting light. Their home, their future. A life built on the foundation of one whispered warning and the trust that had blossomed from it. "Ready for our adventure, Mrs. Santini?" Marco asked, squeezing her hand. Emma squeezed back, her ring sparkling in the streetlight. "Always with you." 1 year after their wedding, Emma stood in the pediatric wing of Brooklyn General Hospital, her nursing degree finally in hand, working her first day as a registered nurse. She had specialized in trauma care, working with children who had witnessed violence, experienced abuse, and survived unimaginable horrors. It was demanding work, emotionally taxing, yet profoundly rewarding. Each child she helped represented a small victory against the darkness that had consumed so many lives in Marco's world. Nurse Santini, a young girl, perhaps 8 years old, looked up at her with frightened eyes. "Is my mama going to die?" Emma knelt beside the bed, taking the child's small hand in hers. "The doctors are doing everything they can, but right now let's focus on making you comfortable." "Okay. Can you tell me where it hurts?" The girl had been caught in the crossfire between rival gangs, her mother undergoing critical surgery. Another innocent victim of the senseless violence that plagued their city. Emma's heart ached as she tended to the child's wounds, knowing that this story was repeated far too often. That evening, she returned home to find Marco in the kitchen, attempting to cook dinner, or rather, setting the oven on fire, judging by the smoke billowing out. "I think we're ordering takeout," he announced sheepishly. Emma laughed, kissing him as she rescued the burnt chicken. "How was your day?" "Productive. We finalized the deal with the city to expand the youth center. We'll be able to serve 3 times as many kids." He poured them both a glass of wine. "How was yours?" Emma recounted the story of the little girl and her mother, the senseless violence that had placed them in danger. Marco listened, his expression growing darker. "What gang?" he asked quietly. "Marco, no. You can't fix every—" "What gang, Emma?" She sighed. "The East Side Vipers. They've been getting bold lately, pushing into civilian areas, not caring about collateral damage." His jaw tightened. "That needs to stop." "What are you going to do?" "Have a conversation. Make it clear that there are rules, lines you don't cross. Innocent people, especially children, are off limits." Emma wanted to protest, to argue that violence was never the answer. But she had lived in his world long enough to understand that sometimes the only language certain people understood was force. "Be careful," she said instead. "Come home to me." Marco cupped her face tenderly. "Always." The following week, the leadership of the East Side Vipers mysteriously disbanded. Rumor had it they had received a visit from the Reaper himself and had been given a choice: follow the rules or face annihilation. They had chosen wisely. The little girl's mother survived. When Emma checked on them a month later, they had moved to a safer neighborhood, into an apartment with affordable rent through one of Marco's legitimate housing programs. The mother had a new job at one of his restaurants, secure work with good pay. "Did you do this?" Emma asked Marco that night. "Do what?" "You know what. The apartment, the job." Marco shrugged. "They needed help. I helped. That's what I do now." Emma studied her husband. seeing the subtle yet significant changes that a year of marriage had brought. He was still dangerous, still commanded respect and fear within his world. But the shadows in his eyes had faded, replaced by a newfound light. He smiled more often, and he slept through most nights without the torment of nightmares. "You're becoming the man your mother always wanted you to be," she said softly. "I'm trying. For her, for you, for the kids at the center." He pulled Emma onto his lap. "You know what Yeppy told me yesterday? He said Isabella would have loved you, that you're exactly what I needed to find my way back to my humanity. I didn't do anything special. You loved me when I didn't deserve it. When I was drowning in guilt and violence, you threw me a lifeline. That's everything, Emma." They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against impossible odds. Emma thought about Vincent's attempted assassination, about how one moment of courage had spiraled into this beautiful, complicated life. "Marco," she said suddenly, "what happened to Vincent? You never told me." Marco was silent for a long moment. "He's alive, in prison upstate, serving 20 years for attempted murder and racketeering." "You didn't kill him." "I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But you'd already shown me there was another way, a better way." He kissed her forehead. "He's being punished, but he's alive. That has to count for something." Emma's eyes filled with tears. This was the man she had married. Capable of terrible violence, yes, but also capable of mercy, of choosing the more difficult path because it was the right one. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "I'm proud of us. Look at what we've built together." Marco gestured around their home. "A real life, a good life. We're making a difference, Emma. One kid at a time, one family at a time. We're fighting the darkness with light." Over the following months, their impact continued to grow. The youth center expanded, offering job training and college preparation courses. Emma's trauma program at the hospital received funding through Marco's foundation, helping countless children heal from violence. Marco continued his work, but with a renewed focus. Protecting his neighborhood, yes, but also investing in it, building it up, creating opportunities for its residents. The violence didn't vanish completely. It likely never would. But Marco's reputation underwent a significant transformation. He remained the reaper to his enemies, still inspiring fear and respect, but to the people of Brooklyn, he had become something else entirely. A protector, a patron, a man who used his power to uplift others. One evening, Emma arrived home to find Marco in the nursery they had been preparing. They had discovered 2 weeks earlier that she was pregnant, and the news had turned him into an anxious, overprotective, utterly devoted expectant father. "I've been thinking," he said, holding up 2 paint swatches. "Blue or green for the walls. Marco, we don't even know if it's a boy or a girl yet. Then maybe yellow, something neutral." He set down the swatches and pulled Emma close, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I want everything to be perfect for our baby. It will be because they'll have you as a father." "Me, Emma? I'm terrified. What if I mess this up? What if my past, your past, is what makes you the perfect father? You know the dangers out there. You know what to protect our child from. But more than that, you know the importance of love, of second chances, of choosing light over darkness." Emma kissed him softly. "Our baby is going to be so loved." Marco's eyes glistened with tears. "I want to be better for them, for you. I want to build a world where our child doesn't have to be afraid. Then let's build it together, one day at a time." 9 months later, Isabella Emma Santini entered the world, screaming with her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes. Marco held his daughter with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face, whispering promises of protection and love. Emma watched her husband cradle their child and felt a profound shift in the universe. This was what they had been building toward. Not just a life together, but a future, a legacy of healing instead of violence, of love instead of fear. Joseph visited the next day, bringing enough food to feed an army. "She's beautiful. Isabella would be so happy. She would be proud of Marco," Emma said, watching her husband rock their daughter. "Of the man he's become. He's proud of himself, too." I think finally. Joseph patted Emma's hand. You saved him. That night in the diner, you saved much more than his life. You saved his soul. As the weeks turned into months, Emma observed Marco transform once more. He scaled back his business commitments, dedicating more time to being home with Isabella. He read her stories, changed diapers without complaint, and walked the floors with her at 2 a.m. When she wouldn't settle, the feared Mafia boss, reduced to putty in his daughter's tiny hands. She smiled at me today, he announced one evening, his face radiant with wonder. A real smile. Probably gas, Emma teased. It was not gas. It was a smile. She loves her papa. Emma laughed, pulling him down for a kiss. Of course she does. Everyone who meets you loves you, once they see past the reputation to the man underneath. Not everyone, just the people who matter. Marco gazed at his wife and daughter with complete adoration. My girls, my whole world. Years later, when Isabella was 5 and asking questions about how Mama and Papa met, Emma would tell her a simplified version. A story about courage and kindness, about a woman who saw danger and chose to act, and about a man who learned that true strength meant protecting rather than destroying. So, Mama saved Papa? Isabella would ask, her dark eyes wide with curiosity. Mama and Papa saved each other, Marco would correct, pulling them both close. And they lived happily ever after. It wasn't exactly a fairy tale. There were still challenging days, still threats to manage, still the weight of Marco's past to carry. But they carried it together, building a life of meaning and purpose from the ashes of what had been. Emma had learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing someone despite their flaws, about seeing their potential and helping them achieve it. Marco had learned that he didn't have to be defined by his worst moments, that redemption was possible through action and commitment. And together, they had learned that sometimes the most unlikely love stories, the ones that shouldn't work, that defy logic and reason, are the very ones that change everything. As Emma stood in their garden one evening, watching Marco push Isabella on the swing while she shrieked with laughter, she thought about poison in a glass and a whispered warning, about how one moment of courage had led to this. A family, a home, a future brimming with possibility. Don't swallow, it's poisoned, she had said. And in saving his life, she had found her own. The betrayer paid for his crimes behind bars, spending his days reflecting on the cost of his greed. The innocent were protected. The guilty were punished. And two people who had found each other in darkness built a life filled with light. Justice, mercy, and love had prevailed, and that was the greatest victory of all.